Great. Hi, I'm Professor Green, and today we'll be talking about Chapter 1 in Strategic Management by Dr. Frank Rothermael. So, the learning objectives for this chapter include explaining the role of strategy in a firm's quest for competitive advantage. So, what does it mean to have a strategy, right? We talk about diagnosis, we're going to talk about great, putting in policy, and then my favorite part, implementation. When I worked in banking and in all these different industries, I was always on the implementation side. So, while I had colleagues that were very good at coming up with these ideas, I was very good at taking those ideas and making them actually happen. And so we'll discuss that whole process and what is exactly strategy. Then we're going to dive a little deeper and talk about competitive advantage, sustainable competitive advantage, how you keep moving forward, hopefully, compared to your competitors. Competitive disadvantage, how you're moving maybe backwards or how you're not keeping up with your competitors. And then competitive parity, when there are times when you're moving kind of neck and neck. I can think of LMU moving neck and neck with Fordham or Gonzaga or St. John's, things like this. So other Catholic colleges. Um, hmm. And so then we're going to also talk about the assessing the relationship between stakeholder strategy and sustainable competitive advantage. You'll talk about this also in your ethics class, and also one of my favorite topics because I spent a career as a project manager, and my role all day, every day was to manage these stakeholders, right? To understand who was important, what their priorities were, and make sure that everyone was, for the most part, accounted for. And we'll talk about how some stakeholders need to be more or less accounted for. And so, yeah, the relationship between stakeholder strategy and sustainable competitive advantage. So, how managing those stakeholders allows you to remain competitive advantage, hopefully, in theory. We will conduct a stakeholder impact analysis. So, again, listing out all the stakeholders and then prioritizing who are they, what are their interests, what are our obligations to them. And then lastly, we'll explain the analysis, formulation, implementation strategy framework. So kind of circling back to number one, we've identified those things in learning objective number one, and now we put it together in a little framework. And the opening case for this chapter is about Tesla. And so while we won't get into it too much here in this video, I see that, it has a great strategy about EV cars. And those cases will be updated. So if you're watching this video in future semesters, I know like NVIDIA is coming in for edition 7, et cetera. The whole idea is that a company with a good strategy has a better chance of succeeding. So here we move on to slide number 2, no strategy. And this is, goal-directed actions. And so to gain and sustain, oops, sorry, didn't want to, okay, yeah, we missed one here. Strategic management and integrative management field. So again, it integrates lots of different places within management, finance, marketing, et cetera. It has lots of different things that go into making this strategy, human resources. It combines analysis, formulation, and implementation in the quest, as I mentioned, for this competitive advantage, having an advantage again over your competitors. And mastery of this topic allows you to view a firm in its entirety. It becomes super fun because you can look at an organization and then kind of tune in to, what is making it work or not work. You start to think like a general manager. And then if you're working in one of these organizations, how can you position your organization, right, for superior performance? And whether that be a small organization, a large organization, et cetera. This morning when I woke up, I thought to myself, oh, I was an entrepreneur for a short time and I had yoga DVDs that I was producing. At the beginning, I kind of just wanted to create yoga DVDs to have like a passive income. So I spent all this time in production and then I put them on a website. And my goal was just to sell them, but that's not really a strategy, right? It wasn't until I kind of worked harder on it and I decided I would like to have an international distribution model for these yoga DVDs. And so then I started to go to different events and different conferences. I went to the south of France a few times, to the Cannes film market, the one specifically for DVDs and at the time, streaming and television, and then it started to click. Then I was able to sell the rights to my content to China and Belgium and Russia and a handful of different places because all of a sudden now I had soon and eventually moved these DVD products forward into a strategy. So here, now slide number three or four, besides the 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 cover slide, we have directed actions to gain and sustain superior performance relative to the competitors. So, the companies to compete for resources, as I said, new ventures, that's where we talk about Tesla, financial and human capital, right? Existing companies, things like General Electric, Facebook, Facebook used to not be a new venture, but now it is. Charities, we talk about nonprofit organizations, universities, the best students and the best professors. Those are actions to gain and sustain superior performance. Sports teams, we talk about, the Rams or University of Notre Dame football team, or I went to Villanova undergrad, and last night I saw on social media that they're so excited. They're undefeated. I think 6-0 this semester, this fall. And yeah, so they're really excited. While Villanova is more known for our basketball program, the football program actually does quite well. And so they have these actions to be undefeated and they want to sustain the superior performance. And so when they won this week, they were elated, right? Because they're undefeated. And our next game is against Harvard on Saturday, and they're hoping to further sustain this superior performance. And so, right, their strategy is to win these championships. Good. And then, of course, celebrities, right? They have strategy as well, right? Taylor Swift, Ed Sheeran, right? They all have a team of people working on their strategy, and mostly it is to get endorsements to people for people to like their work, right? And didn't work for a celebrity. I worked for like a mini celebrity for a short time and a big, very popular yoga instructor in Los Angeles. And exactly, he was traveling the world and getting different yoga studios and different public speakers to endorse his work. Yeah, and it worked. I have to say, he's very popular. A good strategy is based on three elements. First, the diagnosis of the competitive challenge. So you're going to analyze the firm's internal and external environments. Hopefully, this should start to ring a bell because in your marketing courses, you talk a lot about a SWOT analysis, right? Your strengths and your weaknesses, your opportunities and threats. Right. So the strengths and the weaknesses are all about the internal environment, and the opportunities and threats are about the external environment. Right. And so that's the first thing that you do when you have an organization is where are we, right? Where do we stand? What do we do well? What are our weaknesses? What do we do not so well? Where there are some gaps, right? What are the opportunities? Where can we grow? And where are those threats, right? Where are those competitors? And so then the next thing is to talk about the guiding policy to address the competitive challenge, right? And we'll go further into detail. So maybe I should just skip through this slide a little faster because we're going to go, each of these pieces are going to have a separate slide. So a guiding policy to address the competitive challenge and a set of coherent actions. Again, my specialty is to implement the firm's guiding policy, right? What does that mean? And so let's go ahead and go through it. So the first thing is the competitive challenge. The example that they gave here in the book, right? Tesla must manufacture attractive and affordable vehicles using its new technology and build the required infrastructure, such as charging station networks. So that's what they saw, that not only was it their job to create great cars, but they also needed to make sure that they had a place for people to charge because of this anxiety, charge anxiety, right? My husband has a Rivian and he drives and he gets very stressed not knowing exactly where he's going to be able to find the next charging station. So, when you have a competitive challenge, you need to first start out with precise and a critical diagnosis of the competitive environment. Right. Then you work through the guiding policy, right? And Tesla, they started to build these cost competitive, right, mass market vehicles and made significant investments in these battery production across the globe. The book speaks a lot about the, Giga Shanghai, Giga Texas, Giga Berlin, Giga Nevada, right? And so they have this now policy to build these places where they could create these batteries so that they could then supply the cars with those. And then we have some coherent actions. And so again, this is how do we implement this? We can talk all day about amazing strategy, but how do we actually get it to work? And so in this example, Tesla needs to ramp up production so it can get to economies of scale, right? As you all know, hopefully, economies of scale is like the more you produce, the cheaper it gets, and the easier, more efficient it gets to produce because you get more used to the process. And you can buy in bulk and a whole bunch of different things. And they broke ground for a new factory in Shanghai. Tesla will also not introduce any more new vehicles, right, for the time being, right, because they want to focus on the ones that they have, and they want to use those economies of scale to really produce cheaper vehicles. And also Tesla made some proprietary technology available to the public. And so they decided to like open it up. So they wanted people to share this information so that they too could make cars, so that they too could use their charging stations and be and like partners a little bit with Tesla. And so they thought that would be a good way to grow their business. And it's true. It worked for them. As I said, my husband has a Rivian and he always says like, oh, okay, where are the Tesla charging stations? I'll be able to use one of those. And so it gets buy-in for the Tesla brand as well. And use of the Tesla charging stations and a handful of different reasons. And so, as I said, implementation was always kind of my specialty that for better or for worse, I was an engineer undergrad and then I had an MBA. And so I love taking strategy and then, reaching out to the people to make it work. I worked at Citibank and I was a project manager overseeing about 100 engineers developing product for software and a little bit of hardware too, but mostly software to roll out for our 300,000 users. So once the CEO told us what the priority was. So at the time, it was Sarbanes-Oxley and data privacy and security, I should say, of and ethics of so a whole bunch of things rolled into Sarbanes-Oxley, but um, making sure that nobody, let's say, focus on security, nobody could hack into the banking systems. That was actually my specialty for many years. And so once I understood that that was the strategy, that we want to make our systems secured, I would go out and talk to the engineers and make sure that they were developing in that way. And my job was to communicate those priorities to the engineers, right? They didn't necessarily, their expertise was not necessarily in business, while mine was because I had an MBA, but I also had an engineering degree. So in theory, I was able to have this engineering speak, right? And communicate those ideas to the engineers or understand their processes at least. So not so much in theory, actually in reality. And so um, the lovely part was, after a couple weeks, months, then we had these technologies that we were able to roll out throughout the whole bank that met the strategy of the CEO. And so competitive advantage on page 17 talks to this, superior performance relative to other competitors, as we've spoken about in the same industry or the industry average. It's relative to other, so it's always kind of changing depending on where your competitors are. And so you need to benchmark the firm in the same industry or the firm to the industry average. And last night I was speaking to a student and we were saying, yes, like NVIDIA is doing great today. But then they have some scandals, and then their competitive advantage drops a little bit compared to AMD and a handful of their different competitors. And then they overcome those scandals. They talk to their legal department, their PR department. They make changes within their organization, and then their competitive advantage goes up again, right? And so your competitive advantage is always somewhat shifting. And so for that reason, it keeps us business people with jobs all the time because the whole idea is that you want sustainable competitive advantage. You want to be able to outperform your competitors over a long period of time, hopefully. And one of the few organizations that is able to do that up until now has been Apple with the smartphone industry, right? Over Samsung, for better, for worse. It's lasted over a decade, right? You think maybe a decade is not that long. And it's true, right? Because these companies evolve and things change and we have new technologies and better strategies and better CEOs. And so the players will shift. But the whole idea is that people are buying Apple's phones in the big picture more than they are Samsung. And there's a reason for that, right? And so, yeah, they have sustainable at this stage competitive advantage. And so, let's talk a little bit about competitive disadvantage and competitive parity. So, a disadvantage is when a firm underperforms, and and underperforms its rivals and the industry average, so it's not doing so well. So Roblox, for example, at the moment when I'm filming this here on November 24th, 2024, right? Roblox is going down because it had so many scandals against pedophiles and security and, really, leaking and giving opportunity to really bad people out there. And so the stock dropped about 30% over the last few months. And so, yes, 100%, they are at a complete disadvantage at the moment. So, and then we talk about ROIC. This is the return on invested capital. And so is 15% return on invested capital superior? And it really depends on the industry, right? So some industries like go up, quite a bit, some like stagnate. The tech industry, right? NVIDIA is like all over the place. But some industries like utilities and healthcare for like hospitals and things like this. I wouldn't say healthcare pharmaceuticals, but some healthcare products, let's say utilities, right? They can be quite stagnant. So it really depends on the industry, or not, yeah, not stagnant, stable. And competitive parity is when two or more firms that perform at the same level. And yeah, and I think I already went through an example of that, but the whole idea is like when they're really kind of neck and neck. And so, how to gain competitive advantage? Yeah, it's kind of a question is like, what's the meaning of life, right? But competitive advantage, theorists have come together with some good ideas to start with. You know, provide goods and services that consumers value more highly than those of its competitors. Or are similar to the competitors at a lower price. So, with back to my yoga DVDs, right? That I created these yoga DVDs. This is like in 2010 or so, 15 years ago. And I tried to sell them here in the US market on a website. They didn't really move because there were hundreds of yoga DVDs in the same style. I did yoga for families, so I was all about children and grandparents and parents getting involved and doing yoga together. And so my competitors here in the US were creating the same type of product. And so there wasn't any more value that I was providing than other ones. But then as I did go to international markets, right, that all of a sudden my yoga DVDs had amazing value because people in China and Belgium and Russia weren't able to get these types of product, right? They didn't have anything like yoga for families or yoga for grandparents. Those were the name of my two titles. And so, yeah, and it was just an amazing opportunity at the time for me to provide something of value. Hmm. And then, yeah, the rewards was a profitability. So obviously, then I started to make my money back. I had royalties for years, probably 12 years. I would continuously get a check every month from these distributors who were sending my DVDs in different directions. And I had amazing market share, especially like in Eastern Europe. You turn on a fitness channel, and there I am. I'm in Serbia. And I am doing yoga with children in the video. And I'm the only one on these fitness channels doing yoga with children. And so I had amazing market share, which was really cool. Good. And then strategic positioning. So we talk a little bit about the CEO of Spanx here and how she was creating confidence in women, right? And so she created a unique position within the industry because, of course, before Spanx, we had underwear, we had stockings, we had, clothing and things like that. But she created this new product that created amazing value to its customer. And she also was controlling her costs, right? She produces in Asia and she was making this now affordable. You didn't have to spend hundreds of dollars on some, custom made, um, you know, uh, outfit to hold in your belly or keep your thighs in, things like this. And yeah, she just did a great job. And so it's value creation minus the cost equals economic contribution. And so again, the greater, the better. And it enhances the likelihood of competitive advantage. And so, as you can know, right, Spanx has grown to an amazing, huge, large company. Then we talk about strategic positioning, how it requires trade-offs, right? It's not all like honey and peaches and apple pie all the time, right? When I was at Citibank, they had to prioritize, right, what was important. And when they prioritized security, that meant that we were foregoing enhancements in other directions. And so like I remember, no, that's my dog here, letting us know that she's and Citibank was initially the leading bank with the ATMs back in like the early 90s. But we lost that edge because Citibank became so big and it needed to adjust the priority because it was so big and so international. They had to focus less away from the consumer bank and ATMs, and more into data security and investment banking and making sure that the trades with the stock market were safe, things like this. And so, yeah, so managers have to make conscious trade-offs. How do we allocate those resources? Which activities are we going to pursue? Just like, when you go to college, right? Of course, maybe you wanted to go to college in New York, or maybe you wanted to go to college abroad or you wanted to go to a big sports school, right? But you made some trade-offs. You decided that LMU was going to be the right place for you, that this was a place that was a smaller school, a Catholic school, maybe you liked the business school, and maybe you wanted to stay close to home because you're from California, et cetera. So, right, every time we make a decision, there are trade-offs. And it's the same thing in business and with strategy. And the example they have here with the retail industry, comparing Walmart to Nordstrom, they're not actually competitors, even though they're both in the retail industry, right? Walmart is a cost leader, big box outlet, low prices. And Nordstrom has professional salespeople, this whole customer service thing. And there's actually very little overlap, but they're both selling things, and they decided to make decisions in different directions. So now we have a unique strategic position that a successful combination, and we just have like 8 more slides left or so. A successful combination of strategic activities. So it has to come from performing different activities or performing the same. Back to my yoga DVDs, that I had to um, you know, I didn't have actually different activities. Yoga is hundreds of years old, and they've been doing yoga for a very long time. But I was performing that same activity a little bit differently than my rivals, right? I entered the not only the family market, but I entered the international market at the same time. And so again, they go back to the Walmart example. So it's strengthening its position as a cost leader. So yeah, for better, for worse, they really haggle quite a bit with their vendors. This actually has overlap with my yoga DVDs. I got an offer from Walmart to put my DVDs in there, but I said no because I wasn't going to make any profit. And it could have been a great opportunity for exposure, and that had I had like 10 yoga DVDs and maybe sold only 2 titles to Walmart, people would have liked my work and then gone to my website and I would have made money there. But I only had 2 titles. I wasn't necessarily in the yoga industry for the long term. It was kind of like a hobby that turned into a business. And uh, I wasn't necessarily interested in staying in that, despite my decent success in the international markets. And so Walmart has big stores, low overhead, and low wages. They have a great website. The slide doesn't talk about. They have sophisticated IT systems, and so a whole bunch of different things that have really given them a great opportunity and an amazing competitive advantage. So, what is strategy not? Right? The first thing is grandiose statements. We will be number one. We will win. Right. And so that's the problem with Twitter, right? They went forward and they said, we're going to have the largest audience. Well, that's lovely, but that's not really going to make you money or get you anywhere or differentiate yourselves. And so they lost, right? Eventually, Jack Dorsey had to resign, and now Elon Musk has taken over, et cetera. So you can't just have these big statements and a failure to face a competitive advantage. So you need to move forward, right? Blockbuster, they just were stuck in their idea that people would go to a store to rent a a VHS, cassette, or eventually maybe DVDs, but they didn't see that Netflix was coming in with this mail order or Amazon Prime with streaming or Hulu. And they had all these competitors, but it's like an amazing story for businesses, for business schools, because we can see how Blockbuster really stagnated 100%. And then you need to have operational effectiveness, competitive benchmarking. So key performance indicators. You're constantly, as a CEO, identifying what are our indicators of how we're doing compared to our competitors. And you're asking your team to measure these indicators on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, et cetera, so you can gauge how well you're doing. And so you're looking at pricing strategy, operation strategy, brand strategy. And while those are all good policies, they're not like an overall strategy. And so we want to look at overall efforts to gain and to sustain a competitive advantage. Then we have value creation. Um, so they're able to provide services to consumers at a price point that they can afford, right? And that enables the company still to make a profit, right? And so again, I had these yoga DVDs. I was selling the rights at a, a- an affordable value for these countries. And I was still making money, right? That, as I said, I was getting royalty checks for 10, 12 years. And that was, really doing well. And so value creation lays the foundation for a successful economy. And why I love studying business or teaching business is because this helps society, right? So that we then it moves education forward, it moves infrastructure forward, it moves public safety, healthcare. We can clean water and air, and so organizations are able to help move society forward. Like Google, for example, they make money with some services, but then they're able to then have the internet product, which is like really information gathering, which is really a free service, right? Every time you use Google, unless you click on an ad, it's really a free service. And so amazing that they have created so much value and that they're able to then keep a portion of the business that is free for everybody. And then the book, I can't help it. I have to mention HP, right? That they're no longer known for their innovative products like they were 10, 15 years ago. And so unfortunately, they are also a dying organization, just like Blockbuster. And stakeholders, organizations, groups, and individuals that can affect or be affected by the firm. They have a vested claim. You have internal and external. So internal or within the organization, stockholders, which is different from stakeholders, employees, board members, internal, and then external. Customers, suppliers, partners, creditors. I love this next slide because it puts it into an infographic here. And so, as you can see, right, we have external outside. You think of it as a building outside of the organization, and internal inside the organization. And then stakeholder strategy, managing a diverse set of stakeholders. And so we need cooperative stakeholders, right? So that they can reveal information. So again, that's why I engage with all of you in the classroom, because you all are stakeholders in this course in an LMU. And when we work together, I can also learn information about what's happening at LMU, what you guys think of the business school, events that I can then integrate into my course. There's increased trust. Um, so that their business transactions, so people feel that they don't need to like charge a fee for a transaction cost because they trust that it's going to come, etc. Everything goes a lot smoother when you have this well done stakeholder management. It can be more adaptable, more flexible, right? Just like when you work with your parents, because they are key stakeholders in your life and in your college experience, as opposed to your friends' parents, right? Maybe they are stakeholders in some way, but they're farther out. So you know your parents so well, right? And so you can adapt, they can adapt to you, you can be more flexible, right? As opposed to working with your friends' parents, which are not really part of your if you think of yourself as an organization. It's more predictable, stable returns, and a stronger reputation, of course, right? When we talk about Disney, they constantly have drama and scandals and things like this. And so why they have those is because they forgot about a stakeholder who they should have encountered or they should have engaged with, or maybe they thought about it, but they didn't realize how vocal they were going to be. So again, if Disney wants to keep their strong reputation, they need to continue managing all these stakeholders. And so there's a decision tool for stakeholder strategy. So we're all about recognizing and prioritizing the stakeholder needs, the three attributes: power, legitimacy, and urgency. So how much power do they have? So to get the company to do something that they would not otherwise do. Uh, Legitimacy, legitimate claims, if it's valid or not, and urgent claims. So again, back to Disney. Um, so yeah, I think there's so many different scandals, but to think about um yeah, this LGBTQ thing that came up years ago. So, they really wanted to incorporate a lot of those things. And if they hadn't talked to those stakeholders, they would have been pressured to do something and to outwardly say that they include those types of people in within their ranks of their employees. And so these groups, these LGBTQ groups, they have legally valid, right, claims. They were legitimate claims, and it wasn't necessarily urgent at the time, but it would have become more urgent had they not responded to them. And then here's an impact analysis, right? Who are our stakeholders? What are their claims and interests? What opportunities do our stakeholder present? We also talk about Nestle and how they started to get boycotts against because of the baby formula that they were selling and really marketing and pushing to the mothers in Africa, telling them supposedly that it was better than breast milk, and then putting these children at risk because they need water for the baby formula and the water isn't safe there. And it's expensive, and so they were taking away money that could other be used for other things. Yeah. And then corporate social responsibility. So again, you talk about this a lot in your ethics class, so I won't deep dive into it, but the whole idea about philanthropical, ethical, legal responsibilities, and economic responsibilities. So again, this being the foundation. So the company needs still to make money always, but then, and it also needs to be legal. And in theory, they need to do what was right. But then eventually they can do some corporate citizenship, like I talked about with Google and providing free services, search engines, right? Creating internet for us. And then the last slide is this AFI framework, which we'll talk more and more about this course. How do we manage this strategy process? We analyze it. So we create KPIs, indicators is what should we analyze. We formulate those things and then we implement those ideas, my specialty. And it can explain and predict differences in firm performance and help leaders formulate and implement a strategy that can result in superior performance. And here is an infographic. Again, we have the analysis piece up here, getting started, external and internal analysis. So yeah, KPIs, SWOT analysis, then formulation, right? Okay, what do we want to do with that information? Who are our threats? what do we do well, etc. And then, yeah, implementation, how do we create our organization? How do we design? What's going to be the structure, the culture? How do we control things within the organization? What's our governance model, et cetera, which we'll talk more about in this chapter. And so hopefully you found that all interesting. Thank you so much for joining me here for chapter one. This was a lot of fun to start this, and I look forward to seeing you all in class.